Coming to you from the last remnants of white privilege in South Africa, this is the Boer Republic podcast. Thank you for listening. Today, we'll be discussing the reason for the choice in name for this broadcast, as well as a casual discussion on a few realities we face in South Africa today. We conclude with a message of hope for those that feel our situation in South Africa is a hopeless one. Enjoy.
Right, so basically what I want to start talking about is why we chose the name Boer Republic, and please tell me what you think about that. So, as it's something that's close to our hearts and we really want that as our name, I have been speaking to a lot of people, and the reactions that I've gotten is, for me, quite interesting with regards, especially to the people obviously in South Africa, the way that they react to it. And I think one of the main things I want to start with is basically talking about people's perception of the word itself and what should our association with the word be. What I mean with that is you can basically start with words like Nazi or KKK, where people have basically thrown the word into the proverbial historical dustbin, although people are obviously trying to use Nazi in a different way in America. But it's interesting to see the perception people have of Boer. Just using the word, it really brings out a lot of hatred, brings a lot of pain, brings a lot of negativity, and basically it's insulting just to use the word. So I kind of want to think what you think. What's people's perception of that word today here in South Africa?
You'll find that many people have various reactions. I suppose it's also very ethnically bound.
Correct, yes.
Another interesting parallel to draw, just referring to the way you mentioned negative connotation. There is a parallel to be drawn between the way that the word Boer or Afrikaner is associated with apartheid, in very much the same way that Nazi or National Socialist might have an association with Germany between 1933 and 1945.
Yes. In
the same way that also Southerners in America, basically any association that there might be between Southerners and the preservation of culture immediately gets thrown into the basket as either KKK sympathizers or the association between slavery, or that, the American version of apartheid. I mean, black civil rights come out. There are all sorts of historical notions that come out in that very idea. And in many ways, South Africa is the precursor, or I wouldn't say is the precursor to Nazi Germany, but is the precursor to the vitriol that certain words evoke, purely because there is a current cultural association with hatred and a certain nationalistic aspect of white culture.
Yes, I think the idea for me is, and that's kind of what I am grappling with, is where can the word, in a sense, be saved? Or do you want to co-opt it back? And I'll use an example. If you take something like the Democratic Party in America, if you look years ago, it was the party that basically fought against the abolition of slavery. And today it's seen as sort of a liberal party with all kinds of, should I say, involving views in that. And even if you take something like Marxists, it's today it's completely acceptable to call yourself a Marxist. It's acceptable to wear the T-shirt, and no one freaks out when you mention that if you're in a conversation with them. But if we look at the death toll allocated to Marxism and hence communism, it's way more than what Nazi Germany produced. So the idea that a word and group can be actually safe, for me is it's definitely something that you can do. And for me, it's kind of at that point where if we don't try and save, if we don't start by trying to redefine the word in the way that we think it should be, then the culture is lost, if you know what I mean with that. So I think it's an important place to start, because that's where culture starts. It's what people think a word means. What do you think?
Essentially, there are many words that have associations, especially the derogatory terms that you'd find coming out of, for instance, those two eras that I mentioned previously. I mean, over here, we've got the K word. Over in America, there's the N word. And, you know, you can call it what, you can say the word or whatever, and immediately there would be a serious backlash, or even self-censorship. I even self-censor now. And that connotation is there. So I think once you've started self-censoring, you start self-censoring your own inclinations towards your culture, sometimes perhaps even your ethnic culture or history. So in the same sense, you lose parts of yourself. And I mean, in today's society, it's a very homogenized society. Fine, you've got local groups, and there might be local peculiarities and things that might be special to you, or, you know, might be seated in language. I mean, English in South Africa is different to English in Britain and America in terms of colloquialisms, things like that. You have that, but culture is still very homogenized. In the Western world, especially in South Africa, we're influenced by aspects of American Hollywood culture, American music culture. And it's not only whites, all nationalities in South Africa or ethnic groups are affected by the way music might, for instance, affect you, or specific types of music might be targeted to specific groups. And then you've also got a mixed match. But without going too much off topic, I think there is definitely a reason to want to claim one's own culture, especially in today's society. You see it manifesting in all the identity politics groups in Europe as well as America. In Sweden, Norway, you've got identity groups that are especially rising against the severe situation in regards to immigrants. In the UK as well. In the UK, there's some serious censorship with regards to nationalist groups. America, there are nationalist groups. You've got the rise of the alt-right, and that's become a global phenomenon. And that's perhaps one thing that one can look at in the future with regards to this podcast, is how would an identity group rise in South Africa without being negative? In the sense that a nationalist identity group rising in South Africa without immediately getting that negative connotation of over here we've had the Afrikaner resistance movement. In Afrikaans it would be RVB. And that was a nationalist group, a pro-white group, and it looked out for the interests of whites. We aren't allowed to have that in South Africa. I mean, you're not even allowed to have that in the rest of the Western world. I mean, there's a huge backlash. So how does one start by creating a positive movement that would be on pro-white interests and pro-white culture? By saying pro-white culture, Afrikaner, as well as what remains of the English South African culture. And there are many people like that. I mean, white people, you've got European groups from all over in South Africa that tend to gravitate towards a sort of a unified English group, although they've got their own ethnic interests, especially Mediterranean Europeans. But the more Anglo-Europeans in South Africa, the more Anglo and mostly Germanic Anglo groups are sort of under an umbrella term where it's you either English or Afrikaner. And in my mind, the Boer Republic, this podcast, and what comes of it, is an attempt at creating positive awareness of white interest, especially in a country where we are the minority, where we are, even though we have to carry, and that's a topic on its own, even though we have to carry a large percentage of the tax weight in this country, financial weight, etc., etc. I think this is a way of creating of first of all, negating that negative connotation and creating something positive, something that others can look up to and look forward to, especially for their own history, for their own culture, for their own future. Because this Boer project, this Boer Republic, is to create a future for those that are the cultural inheritors of the Boers, the Afrikaners, of the South Africans that originally built up the cities, that built up this country. And that's also a contentious topic all on its own, in much the same way that the founding of America is a contentious topic by saying that essentially the whites built America, but then you've got the argument, but it was built on the back of slaves, which isn't exactly true. That's also a contentious topic. But I mean, in South Africa, we've got the exact same argument.
Definitely, yeah. It is. Yeah, I think, if you talk of words being co-opted, a nice example is if you take Islam, for instance, if ISIS has completely changed what the world's perspective of Islam or Muslim, and if you talk to most Muslims, they say they're a religion of peace, but we know that in most people's minds it is seen as an affront to their safety, and it is obviously linked to a terrorist ideology. And I won't say that I see people doing a lot of hard work to reclaim that name. So using that kind of example, obviously just an analogy, is the same way in that you have groups and you've got songs that politicians are allowed to sing that you can say, shoot the Boer. And that's how often do you actually hear the word being said in public? And usually it is only said when it's associated with something extremely negative. So a big part for me as well is trying to put the word in a light which is positive, first of all. And it's also that we do believe that we do have a right to our own sovereignty. Sorry, not just as a group, but firstly as an individual. And hence that's why I think, for me personally, I wanted to use the word republic, because in a sense, republic it's not a democracy. It's not where you can be outvoted. It is where there is defined borders. And in this case, in our case, it's not that there's defined land borders, but it's that you as a person that is your boundary, that is your border, and you have the right to govern yourself, and you have sovereignty over yourself as a Boer, and you now have the ability to also choose how you want to take that forward and what's the future you want to build, whether it will be in this country or not. I think it is, for me, important is that you have to be realistic, and that you don't know if the culture is going to survive this Rainbow Nation attempt. And if it disperses, if it has to disperse, if anything happens, then you want for people to kind of still have that within them, and that it's not just defined to having certain land borders, but it is something that you define within your own values as a culture.
That's also important is the realistic approach. The reality of the situation is this, especially in regards to your analogy. Having politicians sing "Kill the Boer," black politicians singing "Kill the Boer," there is a clear double standard. They're allowed to say that, and it evokes genocide. It evokes violence. Yet that is racist. According to their definition, that would be racist. But the moment you say "kill the Zulu," "kill the Xhosa," "kill the Sotho," those are different tribes, and they are ethnic tribes. They are ethnic groups. The moment you say that, you will have a backlash. You will have a serious backlash on your hands, and you will be killed. You will be excommunicated from any social. You would be destroyed on a social, financial, and a psychological level in this country. And it's happened before.
Sure.
It's happened to people just saying something offhand which had no racial connotation, but because of a cultural misunderstanding, they get ruined. It's happened so often. The idea behind the Boer Republic is not only just to show the double standards and show and inform people that they need to wake up. The other idea is then also to show that by calling it Boer Republic, you've got sovereignty, you've got yourself. And it works on multiple levels. You've got sovereignty of yourself, but by being part of a republic, it has to do with the best that the country has to watch over the rest. That's another topic on its own, but in essence, you are allowed to associate with those that are like-minded. And it was like that at some stage.
Yeah, so I get the same response from everyone, and kind of what I want to leave in a way with people that feel that you, rather than associating with something that in the past has been negative, it is more a case of I want to associate with all the great values and the good values that comes with a culture. And even I want to leave behind the bad values that was associated before and actually move forward and rebuild that thing. And that is a big part that we are looking forward, and we're looking back so that we can learn and move forward in a way that is not just empowering to obviously the minority group that we are, but that in a way empowers others, of any race and kind in the rest of the country to kind of stand up for themselves as well. Because I think this rainbow paradigm that has been kind of taught the last few years is extremely dangerous. And this forced multicultural association is not just the destruction of us, the minority group, but in the end, it just leads to destruction for everybody. And, with regards to people saying that, why don't you focus on the bigger group? Why don't you focus on the group as a whole? Although, and in the sense of towards humanity, that is true, but it's you can't ignore biology, and you can't ignore genetics, and you can't ignore your immediate association with, like you said, like-minded people and your group. And that is just, you kind of have to start accepting biology in a way to move forward. That is kind of something that I really want to talk about through this group.
The one thing to keep in mind is, in this country especially, there is a very natural tendency for people to immediately associate with the in-group and not necessarily with the out-group. By that I mean, if you have, for instance, and fine, there are exceptions to this, but you'll find in general that at a social gathering, white people will mostly stick together, especially a social gathering where there are multiple ethnicities involved. People will make an attempt usually, and depending on the mindset, to mix, but in general, especially when it comes to important matters where people are eating together, where people are associating in many respects, in classrooms, there might be many examples of this. And anyone listening to this in South Africa will have seen this phenomenon take place, is black people will sit by black people and white people will sit by white people. Whether there are individual ethnicities involved, individual decisions involved, for instance, Afrikaans people sitting next to Afrikaans people and more English-speaking people sitting next to English-speaking people, and then you'd have Sothos and Zulus sitting apart, that would happen. That phenomenon does take place, and that is an example of an out-group versus an in-group response to that biological response.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. It's the fact that somehow we've come up with these ideas that are actually completely antagonistic to the gene sets that we have. And the idea for me, especially through this, is always to align morality with sort of biology, which in a sense you could say is just reality. And by allowing myself, firstly, in a moral aspect, to be self-determined, you have to look empirically at what biology has done. And it ends up, as you said, in people aligning with their groups. And that's how it is. That's how it's always been. And you can't forcibly change that. That's the one thing. If people want to change, if they want to voluntarily change their way, that's great. But The idea is to fight against forcibly changing it and trying to forcibly associate people with each other, because that only leads to one thing, and that's destruction.
On that note, if there was one thing, one idea that you'd like to leave the listeners with today, is especially if there might be a hint of optimism in that idea, what would that be?
The optimism that I would leave, especially, and that's more if people are listening that are obviously, white Caucasians living in South Africa struggling. The optimism is more in the fact that I think people are feeling, there is a feeling of being alone. There is a feeling of community that doesn't exist. And it's really that a big part is also here in trying to recreate a sense of community for everybody who wants to self-govern, and people who want their own sovereignty back. And, someone has to start it. And that is the idea that you are not alone, and that there is a community, and there's people willing to talk about ideas. There's people willing to fight for these ideas, no matter where it goes. That is probably the main thing, that we are here to try and build a community.
And that's the reality of the situation. That's, I think, the best message we can give, especially on the start of what will become something better, not only for everyone involved, but I think as an ethnic group, as a cultural group, the Afrikaner nation, the Boer Republic, must know they aren't alone.
Yeah, exactly. Can't agree more.
This has been an episode of the Boer Republic podcast. Please follow us and subscribe on all our various social media pages. The various links can be found in the description below. Media content will be uploaded often, and social media updated regularly. Thank you for tuning in. It is our hope that this podcast informs and inspires. Stay safe and remain hopeful for your future, wherever you may find yourself.